well, guess you lose some and win some. Long as the outcome is income.
Yes, what is up everybody, and welcome back to episode 12 of the Outcome is Income podcast with your hosts Saif Dersey and Reese Booth. For episode 12, we're extremely excited to share with you a recent conversation with Mr. Paul Avins. Now, this is an extremely valuable episode. Both Saif and I can vouch for Paul's experience when it comes to the world of business. Paul has been a business coach for the past 20 years and has helped multiple entrepreneurs when starting, scaling, and exiting their businesses. In this conversation, we deep dive into Paul's experience and uncover his most common findings for startup businesses, the challenges they faced when scaling from 100 to 500k, then 500k to a million, and a million plus. Paul also shares some amazing book recommendations for whatever stage of your journey you're at, and why what you're currently reading may not have any value at this stage of your journey. Also, please stick around to the end of the show for a special surprise.
Right, welcome to the Outcome is Income podcast, Paul Avins. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, hey, listen, thank you for having me, man. What a great title, right? Because the outcome of everything that we do in business should be to generate a form of income, right? So yeah, loving the opportunity to be here and share with you and your audience today.
Absolutely. And just always remember, so for all of our listeners, the question we always ask at the end of the podcast, I will ask it at the front end so you can think about it so when we get towards the end, you kind of understand what the question is. So we always ask, what is one tangible way that you can share something with the audience to be able to kind of create an income from an outcome? So that's something that we will touch up on at the end of the podcast, but it's to give you a bit of a flavour as to what to think about. So
sounds good. Yeah. See if we can hit a few of those as we go through as well, though, right? So
absolutely. So Paul, look,
yes.
You've had a phenomenal journey. I mean, I know myself and my business partners have been to your Scale Up Intensive 2-day course, which was really like eye-opening. It just, as entrepreneurs, you kind of go through life figuring things out yourself, and until you realize that actually there's people that can help you that have been through all your pain points and stuff like that. So I think just before we kind of get into that, do you want to give the audience a bit of a flavor as to your kind of past history, where you were, where you've come to, and kind of what you've gone through within that period of time?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll put it through a different lens. I'll put it through a lens in terms of outcome is income for me. So I'm just heading into my 20th year as what I lovingly refer to as a professional business coach, right? So I do this for a living, but I'm also an entrepreneur at heart. So I was an entrepreneur first and foremost, long before I was ever a business coach, right? And I was kind of fascinated with a single question, which was, why do some businesses go on to be wildly successful? And why do other businesses struggle? And sometimes businesses in the same industry, you'll find one entrepreneur who's finding it really hard to generate income, make a living, and yet you can talk to someone else in the same industry who goes, "Oh, I'm crushing it. I'm doing phenomenally well." So, what is the difference that makes the difference? Was always a kind of question that enthralled me and interested me, right, from a very young age. I sort of jokingly say that I started out my entrepreneurial career when I sold my collection of Smurfs to my sister at the age of 7. And I like to remind her that I actually sold them on a leaseback deal where she's had to pay me rent every month for them. So I was at least generating income from it. It wasn't a one-time sale. But I think, for me, I've always been entrepreneurial ever since I was a kid. And I had a paper round that I ended up figuring out how to generate far more than I was just getting paid for delivering the papers in terms of just the tips and things by adding value to people. And how do you turn a 20-second conversation at a front door into an emotional and engaging story and telling stories with people about what you're up to? And how do you build that relationship in 20 seconds a week? Which was kind of always my mindset with that, even back then, was how can I build a relationship here? How can I create a engagement and a conversation that was the outcome, right? So even back then when I was doing the paper round, the outcome for me was always not just how do I deliver a paper and get paid, but how do I create a memorable moment in this conversation, in this discussion? How can I pay someone a compliment? How can I build a relationship so that actually the income stream keeps flowing, right? The outcome is relationship and connection. And if I do that, the income keeps flowing. So I kind of learned that lesson really early on in my career, in terms of just that the outcome sometimes isn't income immediately in the short term, but it's income, over the longer term, because as I often say to clients now, it's like the game in business is profit is a direct result of repeat customers. And if you really want to have a business that generates consistent flow of income, you're going to need to generate consistent customer transactions, repeat orders, right? That becomes the goal of the game. So having done that, obviously, kind of went to university, dropped out after 1 year because I found the whole idea of sitting in the classroom learning about business really frustrating compared to actually going out and testing things in the real world. And kind of, that for me, just I had a conversation. There was a life-changing conversation with one of the lecturers. I actually, and full transparency, I'm dyslexic, so I'm big at the moment about helping people with dyslexia realize that it's a superpower, it's a gift. There's a hashtag called made by dyslexia, which is a big part of a campaign to try and get schools to test kids for dyslexia much earlier on. I wasn't diagnosed until I was nearly 16 as having dyslexia. And really, it's a talent, it's a skill, because it helps your brain see things differently. So you see opportunities differently, create outcomes differently because of the way your brain's wired. And for me, the sitting in a classroom passively being taught things just never really worked for my brain, right? I always thought I had a learning disability. Turned out actually maybe there was a teaching disability, because the way they were teaching was not really working with my brain and the way my brain is wired. And I think a lot of kids and certainly a lot of entrepreneurs that I've coached over the years have some form of, whether it's dyslexia, ADHD, but genuinely we find the traditional classroom style of learning quite restrictive, right? There's no engagement. So I remember having a conversation with one of the lecturers who criticized me, gave me an F in my paper because I misspelled business. As a dyslexic person, I didn't have one of those amazing things that, like Grammarly, like today, and those kind of texts. Back then, it was all done by hand. I misspelled business, and so gave me an F on the paper, and basically said, look, you have no right to be in business if you can't spell it. And I took that very kind of like personally and said, well, I don't really want to sit and listen to you as a lecturer. I'm going to go out and actually prove you wrong. And it became a kind of, I turned that kind of frustration into a fire that really drove me with the first 2 or 3 businesses that I started as a result of leaving.
That was your big why. Was that your big why, or was that part of your why? Was there a big why for you?
So, well, okay. So, I mean, it was a trigger. I think it was a trigger of like, I remember standing there and having this conversation and thinking to myself, okay, either I'm going to be right or he's going to be right. Okay. So like one of us is going to be right in this conversation. He's either going to be right in terms of saying you aren't going to be successful in business, or I'm going to be right and say, do you know what? I back myself. And I think too often as entrepreneurs, we get talked out of chasing our dreams or talked out of investing in property by people who mean well, but don't have the vision that we have for our life, or don't have the passion to make the difference and the impact. And it's not just about income, it is about impact. I think we're living in a world where, if and this is really interesting. We were talking about this last week with my inner circle, is that all businesses are going to need over the next 3 to 5 years to demonstrate how their business is linked to one of the 17 sustainability goals from the UN. So like that's coming down the track now. So if your business is just about making money, you're going to need to rethink some of those things, because it's going to need to link to a much higher purpose about why you're doing what you're doing, right? So that's an interesting conversation in itself. So I think there's 2 things: there's income and impact. But going back to the point you made, is like my bigger why was driven by, and I'm really transparent about this now. I was adopted, so I'm adopted, right? So large part what drove the first 25 years of my life was trying to answer one question, right? Just one question. And that one question was why wasn't I good enough? Like that was the question that drove me. That was the story in my head. And I've cleaned it up since then. I've had lots of therapy and I'm fine. But the story that got me into personal development was the question of like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I good enough? Why wasn't I good enough, right? Like, why was I put up for adoption? That was my narrative. That was my story. And that drove me because I was trying to prove a point. I was trying to prove that I was better, I was good enough, right? Like whatever good enough meant. But that was a big driver. So when somebody said to me, listen, you're not going to be successful in business because you can't spell it, I was like, well, stuff you, right? I'm not going to sit in a classroom and have you label me as someone who can't be successful, because I believe that everybody can. It's just, I don't know how, or I don't know who to learn from, but I'm not going to take advice from somebody who clearly doesn't understand me, which was really, he didn't understand my brain, didn't understand me. So I just go, do you know what? I'm going to leave. I'm going to go off and, join the family business, which is what I did first. So that kind of led me into that whole kind of like starting early and street smarts versus book smarts. And, one of the things that changed for me later on was realizing that actually one of our jobs as entrepreneurs is the systematic acquisition of skills, right? It's the ability to consistently go, okay, in order for me to achieve this level in my life or my business, I'm going to need to get better as a person. I'm going to need to become a better leader. I'm going to need to become a better marketer. And I need to find a way to learn those skills. And the good news is there's lots, this is where I got interested in things like accelerated learning, NLP, all of that. Because for me, it was about how do I teach entrepreneurs in a way that keeps their brain engaged and keeps them learning and helps them actually implement what they've learned. Because knowledge without action it's just an accumulation of facts. And what's the point? Actually, what you want to do is teach people and coach people in a way that they can go, that's a great idea and I can do something with it and I can act on it now so that I can generate a result. I can get an outcome. I can get a result. And that became a kind of obsession with me. I became obsessed with learning learning how to learn, like how to properly learn. Like, I actually, did courses on how do I learn as a dyslexic person? How do I start to learn properly? Is it reading? Is it visual? Is it, sitting in a classroom? How do I learn best? And then starting to figure out how to teach other entrepreneurs who fundamentally don't like sitting in classrooms and don't like being taught that way. So, that became a kind of, if I'm going to help entrepreneurs achieve scalable businesses, then I've got to figure out a way to teach them in a way that's going to keep them engaged and then a way that's going to help them execute and take action.
Yeah. So I think from your side, so a large part of what you kind of went through, I guess, is understanding a large part of how you're going to deliver that and how it's going to be executable by a lot of these entrepreneurs and how you're going to help them. Now you're at a point in your life where you have helped a lot of entrepreneurs and you're wanting, I guess, that the end goal for you really, is it going to be linked back to part of the adoption or the other triggers that you mentioned? Is there a big why that is linking back to all of this, or is there
a lot less, to be fair, than it used to be originally? I mean, listen, I'll be eternally grateful for the adoption thing because it got me into personal development. That's why I got into personal development. I got fascinated with it. Yeah. I'm fine. I've had lots of therapy over the years. I've had a really good trauma therapist. In fact, last year actually, to help me clear up some long-term stuff. So that's not what's driving me. There was a point it was driving me. It's not anymore. It's not healthy to be driven by that. I'm driven now by the positive impact I want to make in the world and helping entrepreneurs to create real scalable businesses that are valuable and people will pay for. And there's a really important distinction here because like last year we had a number of clients sell and the combined total value was £27.5 million was what they got paid for their businesses last year. Now, that's super exciting because it's what we call having a grown-up business.
Yeah.
So it's having a grown-up business, which, as I say, a grown-up business is something that it will scale without you, pays you like an investor, and other people would want to buy. Right. And that's the distinction. And a lot of entrepreneurs, I've seen it too many times in my career where people get to the end of their life. They've spent, what I call 30 years of blood, sweat and years. I call it, right. They've spent loads of time, loads of effort, loads of money, time away from their family to build something. And then at the end of their life, they put it up for sale. One of two things. One, if they're lucky enough to be in the kind of 20% that actually get sold, that's fantastic. But most people's businesses, when they put it up for sale, they realize very quickly it's not worth anywhere near what they thought it was going to be worth. And I'm really on a mission to help entrepreneurs understand the value that they're actually creating intentionally so that they can go, right, I need this much money for my life. I need this much for my family. Right, how does my business need to look, perform, and behave in order for somebody to want to buy it for that amount of money? Right? Now, I may not choose to sell it. Right. Absolutely. We have loads, I've got a number of clients of mine in my inner circle who have no intention of selling their business, but they're not tied to it. So they're operating like they're an investor in that company now, not like an operator.
Yeah.
And I think that's the goal, is to get as many entrepreneurs as possible out of operating like in the space of being an operator and get them into being a manager, then a leader, then an investor. And that's the journey, right? Operator, manager, leader, investor. That's the 4 steps that you go through. And at each level, you need to learn different skills and you create value very differently. So when you're a manager, you create value very differently to when you're a leader. That journey is very different. So again, it's just that for me, I've been doing this 19 years. I'm into in my 20th year. It's just become really abundantly clear. We've done 500 plus businesses to 7 figures who've scaled to 7 figures and above. And, for me, it's really clear now. There is a very specific set of strategies that you take at each level that are different to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And if you've never done that before, it's very hard to get your head around. So if you've never done £1 million in sales before, you don't understand that to go from 1 to 3 to 5 requires different strategies and different team. Because you wouldn't know that. Why would you know that? It's like if you've never taken a trip to Brazil, why would you know you need to take different things to go to Brazil than you do if you need to go, to Cardiff, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't know. So that my kind of mission, if you like, you ask my why, my mission has been to decode the scale up journey to the point at which I can help entrepreneurs make it easier to navigate. So that reduces the risk of failure and it reduces the chance of more entrepreneurs creating businesses that create jobs, create value in the economy, and create that impact, that not just the income, right? Yes, create the income for themselves, but create an impact in their community or their marketplace, or that for them that's much bigger than just the amount of money they made this year.
Yeah, because I think the word entrepreneur and business, especially post-COVID, in this post-COVID era, is being used so broadly at the minute. And I think people sell one thing on eBay and they all of a sudden have a business and become an entrepreneur. And I think it's differentiating, and I think we've spoken about this previously, being that self-employed type of person to growing a small team to then, like you said, sort of managing that team to then leading that team. And I think that whole progression of that, requires someone to support you, because you need someone that's been there and done that. And I think it'll be interesting to hear from your point of view, what is the most common scaling pains that people are going through when people are coming to you in this kind of phase? And, just give us some ideas as to those scaling pains and what they've done to kind of try and overcome them.
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, I think we talk about, or I now talk about, this 7-figure journey that we take people on, right? Because number one is most people want to get to £1 million in sales, right? So that's the first big kind of landmark. Now, you don't have to get to there, it depends on the margin in your business, but let's assume that's the first part of the mountain. And we use the kind of mountain as a metaphor for climbing the mountain, because, the higher up you go, you need different kit, you need different navigators, you're going to need different skills once you get to the last 10% of the mountain than you are at base camp. You need very different level of training to do that, right? So the higher you want to climb, the different level of team you're going to need around you as well, and the different level of skill. So if you use that as the analogy, base camp being, base camp is 100 grand, right? Realistically, until you've made £100,000 a year as an income, you're not at 6 figures. Until you're at 6 figures, you haven't really figured out whether there's a market, whether you've got a product that solves the market, and whether you can make any money. Realistically, you're still in a trade, you're still definitely in a job mentality, because you're still trading time for money on some level, right? So once you've generated 6 figures of income, you're then in a stage where you go, right, okay, so let's talk about how we go from 100,000 to 500K. Okay, and that's a different set of strategies now, because you can hustle your way to 100 grand. You can work really hard. You can do it on, as you say, you can do it with a VA and an online sales. You can get to 100 grand, right? You should be able to do that. It's not hard to do that if you've got the right playbooks, and there are tons out there. Lots of people, lots of books to read, like .com Secrets from Russell Brunson, stuff like that. That kind of like, here's how you get to 100 grand, right? But once you go from 500 to 500, which is the next big kind of piece, then it's going to come down to 3 things. Right. And the 3 biggest mistakes, I'll give you the mistakes and then gives you the flip side of it. Right. So the mistake I see people make is, number one, there's no defined niche that they're trying to target. They're trying to be everything to everybody. And that's largely driven by fear. There's a fear of like, I don't have enough customer flow at the moment, so I'm going to try and sell what I do to everybody. So I don't have a really compelling niche and a compelling message to that niche. I haven't defined really clearly who I'm serving, what the problem is that they've got, and what I'm the answer to. So niche is number one. Number two, they really struggle with this whole concept of actually selling. They've got an issue with actually selling, whether it's selling people on the idea to come and work for them and selling customers on giving them money. They can't take attention and interest and turn it into desire and then actually conversion into a customer, right? So we talk about, again, here it's where frameworks are really powerful, because you start talking about know, like, trust, transact. You've got to get people to know about you. You've got to get people to like you, like what you're talking about. Like this conversation, hopefully people get to know a bit more about me. Hopefully they like some of the things I'm sharing. They might get to trust me a bit more as I give them more detail in this podcast, and we break down more ways to go from kind of outcome to income, and we break some of those steps down. And then possibly now, or possibly in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, they decide that actually, do you know what? I want to go and spend some time with Paul in an intensive for 2 days. And that's when the transaction takes place. So if you don't have that clear customer journey and it's not clearly mapped out for you as an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to understand where you are in that and what you should be selling next. And the reality is you should always be selling the next logical step. Yeah. And I'm going to pause there and just say, if you haven't written that down, that's really important, because most entrepreneurs at this stage, the mistake they make is they're trying to sell either the whole journey, and I've seen this with property investors all the time, where they try and sell investors on, yeah, invest with me, we're going to build a £10 million portfolio, and it just freaks people out because it's too much too soon, rather than saying, actually, let's just sell you on coming out to a site visit and having lunch with me. Yeah. That's the next logical step, right? So far too often in this stage, the mistake people make is they get excited and try and sell either the full journey for the customer or the whole solution, rather than just selling the next logical step, which might be, hey, let's book a call. Or, hey, let's meet for a coffee. Or, hey, let's come, like we run networking events every quarter, right? VIP networking events. Let's come to one of Paul's VIP networking events and meet him in a right social environment over dinner. Whatever that next logical step is, you've got to be very clear what it is and how it works. So it's number one is not having a clear niche. Number two is not having a clear kind of sales journey mapped out. That sales journey not mapped out. So you're all over the place with your messaging. And then for me, it's not having an irresistible offer. It's not having a core offer defined down as to why would somebody want to convert. What's your core offer? And again, if you're not really clear on what the offer is, it's going to be hard to generate sales because you haven't got a compelling offer. So when I coach people and they're at that level, they're the three things we'll work on. Who's your ideal customer? What's their pain, the niche element of it? Then we'll go into, right, what's the customer journey? What's your sales journey look like? And then finally, what's the offer? What is the offer at this stage? And the offers will be different, right? So if you're not clear on the journey, it's very hard to be clear what offer you should be making at each stage. Because if you haven't got clarity over the journey, you could make the wrong offer at the wrong time. So for example, it could be a really good offer. Like for example, we run a retreat in Spain. It's 4 days in 5-star hotel in Spain. That's a £5,000 product, right? It's a £5,000 offer, and you get tons of value with it. It's worth £35,000, everything included in the offer stack and all the rest of it. But if I make that offer to somebody who's just met me in a networking event and go, oh, you should come to this, it's like the offer's way too early in the journey. It's way too early. Now, there might be one or two people who potentially might want to do that, but normally that's an offer we make to people who've worked with us for at least 6 months. They've got some kind of results. They're making money off what we're teaching them. They're seeing value and they're going, yeah, okay, great. Now I'm prepared to invest to go to the next level and to move up. And that makes more sense. So you can make the right offer at the wrong time and it doesn't work. And I think this is one of those mistakes I see a lot with entrepreneurs is they're making the wrong offer at the wrong time, or they're making an offer that isn't clear to the person and they don't understand why they would want to do that as the next logical step. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, because entrepreneurs, especially up to, I'd even say, the kind of £500,000 level, they're kind of figuring it out as they go along. So they probably have a process, but they've not updated the process. They probably have a system, but it's probably not the best system they could use. It's an old system. And I think mapping things out is probably one of the most powerful things that we don't realize, because we're all so busy in our day-to-day businesses that we're kind of trying to run around to try and get business in and then trying to deliver that business, right? So there's obviously sales and then there's deliverable part of that business. But I think what people haven't done a lot of the time is, and that's where they come across problems, is mapped out a proper sales process, maybe even put some automation in there, put some process in where they can then kind of step away and oversee that. And would you agree as well, Paul? Sometimes you see a large part of abdication versus delegation as well.
I think, okay, so here's the mindset that's going on for most people at this level, right? We're in operator mindset. So we're kind of in the mindset, and this was what caught me out for years, which was, the kind of mindset I bought into, which is, if it is to be, it's up to me, right? I'm gonna hustle hard. I'm gonna do it. And you need to realize very quickly, you've got to shift. If you want to go to 500,000, you're building the foundations for 1 million, not 500,000. If you have that mindset, it changes, right? And then you say, okay, so it's not about me, it's about we. I've got to think team. I've got to start thinking team. Now, what we talk about is something called the core 4. We talk about having 3 people that hit the 4 energies, which is why I bought a company called Contribution Compass to the UK to give entrepreneurs the tools to be able to navigate these levels. And the first thing is you've got to realize that you're going to need 3 people around you, usually up to that point. 2 to 3 people gets you to about 500,000. And you're going to need to have the 4 energies in the compass covered off between all of you. That's the critical things, like the core 4, the 3 persons, but you've got to cover all 4 energies, right? Because otherwise the business is out of balance and it's going to get into trouble as you start to scale. So that's step number 1, is to build out your core 4, 3 to 4 people part-time, 3 to 4 people who cover those 4 energies. And there at that point, that moves you out of operator now into manager. So now you move from being an operator to a manager because you're starting to build out this small kind of core team. Now you want to go from the journey from 500,000 to 1 million, so 7 figures journey. Now it shifts, right? Now it's different. You've nailed down your message, your market, you know your offer, you know your customer journey. Okay, great. Now it's about mindset. Number one, it's about identity. You have to see yourself as a £1 million business owner. That's a big fundamental shift. So one of the reasons we do the retreat in Spain that I was mentioning earlier is because that entire 4-day experience is built to shift people's identity, right? You can't do it in 1-day meetings. You have to do it in a really kind of intense environment for 4 days. But we take them to a 5-star hotel. Because we're trying to shift their identity to the next level, and I can do it in 4 days. I can get you to see yourself as the next level of wealth that you want to move to, whether it's £1 million or £3 million or £10 million. I can get your identity to shift in 4 days because you'll have conversations with clients of mine who are running businesses making multiple 7 figures a year, or ones that have sold for 10 million last year, and they're on stage sharing their story. That shifts your identity so your identity becomes the biggest issue, is scaling between that. Identity is number one, marketing is number two. And normally at this point, this is where you do get into a lot of online marketing, digital marketing, automated marketing, sales funnels, all of those kind of things start to become video marketing, which is why I bought a video production company that you know about. So that becomes really powerful because now getting your message out en masse to a much wider audience is the key to scaling, because you've got an offer that works. You've got an offer that works really, really well. Okay, great. Now the question is, how do we build a platform? And how do we build a brand that generates more inbound traffic for us, right? So how do we do that? That's marketing. You have to have the mindset to want to go do that. That's an identity piece. So how do I have the identity of £1 million business owner before I'm going to get the income? Because you've got to be before you can do, and you've got to do before you can have, right? So that's an identity piece. So you've got to do that first. And then fundamentally for me, so then at that point, it's about team. It's about starting to build a team, whether it's an outsourced team that handles my marketing, or whether it's a video team that I'm starting to build team with specific skills around me to be able to solve some of those issues, the scale up stuff. So it then starts to become about really tech and team at that point. So you're starting to put some technology in to leverage and build those out. And so you get this is where really that you're starting to add people in who've got specific skills, either outsourcers who come in and build things that you need, or you're investing in technology to leverage, but you're thinking much more at that point about how do I leverage my time through team and tech. So it's the identity, then absolutely it's about the sales funnels, the processes, the marketing, and then it starts to be about leverage with team and tech. So that's what gets you to the 7 figures in income. Those elements, right?
Yeah, excellent. And sorry, I'm just trying to sort of unwind a few bits here as well, and just trying to understand the practicalities of it. So I guess a large part of it is, as you said, kind of the energies of your team is really, really important. So you need to have that kind of balance across the board within the team. And this might be going slightly off tangent, but I think it might be relevant to a lot of the listeners, is how do you keep your team in check? A large amount of people talk about sometimes the EOS model, the scorecard-based system. We had a lot of people messaging us about that. But how do you keep your team incentivized, build a culture, and try and retain them so they're basically working with you guys and there's never any friction or work against you guys?
Okay. Good questions. I'm about to say some controversial stuff.
Okay, let's do it. We like controversy.
Okay. I'm about to say stuff that's going to go against what most people will tell you, right? But hear me out and I'll explain why. Okay. EOS is an amazing system, all right? And I love traction and it's brilliant, but most people are using it too early in their journey. Okay. EOS is going to have the most amount of value when you're at 7 figures, not before.
Sure.
Okay, because before 7 figures, you're a small team, usually less than 10, okay? And you're able to manage that culture, and you're able to build and maintain that culture with tools like weekly team meetings, huddles, 90-day plans. There's a great book called The 12-Week Year, which is brilliant at this point in the journey. EOS is a very powerful tool, and you're going to need somebody on the business who's got the right energy, the refining energy to really help execute it. And it's all about operational excellence, which is really relevant once you get above 1 million. Up to 1 million, it is going to be largely, you're still driving this, building the sales and marketing engine to scale it. And you're investing in key skills and tech. And really, 90-day plans and 12-month plans is about what you need. Much more than that, my experience, it can slow the business down. It can start to, you're not ready to put big systems in place because you haven't generated enough cash. So once you get to 1 million, the things you then focus on are different, right? So like, for example, 1 million to say, let's between 1 and 5, 3 and 5, right? And everyone wants to go to a different level. Some people are happy to get to 3 million and go, yeah, great. I'm making, nearly £1 million in profit. I'm happy. I don't want to go much bigger. That's great. And that's fantastic, by the way. Scale means something different to everybody. But if you implement EOS too early, it tends to, in my experience anyway, I found it tends to become something that slows down the growth. It's best implemented after 1 million or very close to 1 million when you're on the way to 1 million. So then when you've got real momentum, and at that point, and I've had one of the top EOS trainers in the UK come and speak to my inner circle, and everybody agreed it was perfect person at the right time because they were on that journey and it made sense. But EOS doesn't talk about a lot of sales and marketing, so it's assuming you've got that nailed on. Right. So if you bring EOS in earlier, in my experience, I find it not as valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but it's not as valuable as if you start to go, right, once I get to £1 million, then I'm bringing in EOS, right?
Yeah.
As a business. I would also say that culture, let me back up for a second and say this, right? I'll say it, but let me unpack it. So culture becomes really critical once you go beyond 1 million because you're starting to build out a bigger team. So normally you'll be going then from 10 to 15 to 20 people. So culture now becomes a critical piece. The vision and the values is really valuable to do between 500 and 1 million because it creates that vision that people get attracted to working for you for, and the values become something that you recruit to. So you recruit to the values as you scale. My experience, the intentionally building the culture and how you build a culture is about having strong vision and values, but culture becomes hyper relevant as a function within the business, as an element, as a critical element once you're at 1 million or above. It's great. You want to have the vision and the values built out, certainly phase 1, version 1 of that, between 500 and 1 million. But once you go above 1 million, then you absolutely need your values and your vision and your mission and what we call the profit pillars nailed down. So the three profit pillars that generate income in the business nailed down, right? Because between 1 million and say 3 to 5 million, so 7 figures in sales, once you hit that level, the critical thing is cash, right? Cash, it becomes 3 things: cash, culture, they become 2, and then process. They become the 3 things that once you get to 1 million really make a massive difference. Cash, culture, and process. I tried to come up with a third one that would replace process but started with C. Couldn't come up with one. So if anyone's got one, message me because I'd love to know, because I'm struggling. It would be great if there was 3 of those with C's, but I had cash, culture, and process. And they become critical at that stage, right? Because you're building the team out. So if you build the team and you haven't got the processes, people are not as efficient, they're not as productive. Therefore, the investment in people isn't as good. So you've got to build really strong processes. That's why EOS is really valuable, in my opinion, at that stage. Really, really valuable. And for me, that whole piece of processes there becomes critical, which is why you're going to need different people on the team. So you're going to need somebody with a lot of sustaining energy and refining energy, because that's all about implementing systems and processes. Yeah. And at that point, you can afford to invest in the technology and the people at that level, because you're focused on generating cash.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And I think everything that I'm hearing from you, Paul, at the minute is timing is so critical. Everything. Yeah. So yeah, there's no wrong or right. It's just about when that becomes relevant to you and your journey.
Yeah. So one of the things that's become really clear to me in the last few years is that, listen, I'm a big consumer of books. I read lots of business books, but it started to become really obvious to me that the wrong book at the wrong time has little or no value. So if you're a startup, reading a book about EOS has very little value to you as a startup. I'm not saying there isn't value in there, but if you're at £1 million a year, it has a ton of value in there as a book. So one of the things I've really started to do with clients of mine is to say, listen, if you're at this level, these are the 5 books that you should read, right? This is it. So like if you're a startup, you should definitely be reading things like Lean Startup. You should be reading Cash Flow Quadrant. You should be reading Think and Grow Rich. There are kind of what I would call fundamental mindset books that you want to read at that level. .com Secrets would be in there for me as well. Like there are some fundamental books, and Scorecard Marketing, Daniel Priest's book, because it's a great tool in terms of lead gen when you start out. So again, there are probably a handful of books that I'd recommend that you read at the sort of startup level. And then as you start to team up, build your team, they become a different set of books you want to read, whether it's things like 1 Minute Manager or 5 Temptations of a CEO, which is a great book once you get to 1 million. I have, so I don't know if you think this would be a good idea. I have thought it'd be a really good idea to publish a blog or a series of videos with what I think are the best books at each level, because I actually think if you look at that and go, oh, I'm at this level, I should read these books, it'd be really helpful. And I don't think anybody's ever kind of looked at it through that lens, but I've just done that with clients. They found it to be really helpful, rather than going, oh, I should try and figure out which books to read. It's you can do the right thing at the wrong time and it won't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's confusing, right? Because you go, well, the book's saying I should do this. Yeah, but what the book's not saying is you should do it if you're at this level, and you should do this if you're at this level. It doesn't say that. So that's the difference. And as you go from, so you start out as an operator, then you become a manager, right? And then once you go above £1 million, you're starting to become a leader. So now it's about being a leader. That's all about, culture. That's all about people, process. It's about managing cash flow, making sure you never run out of cash, which is one of your main jobs then as a leader. So most entrepreneurs get to that level and then get stuck because they haven't gone and studied how to be a leader. They're naturally entrepreneurial, but maybe not, they haven't done the leadership training. There are a few people who are natural leaders and they crush it at this level, and you look at them in awe and go, well, how did they do that? But for the rest of us, me included, had to go start reading books on leadership and taking courses on leadership and going, I need to be a better leader than I was, because as a manager, that's one set of skills, but as a leader, it's a very different set of skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it'll be really, really beneficial. And I haven't seen anyone do that before, where you can break down the kind of literature, books, audiobooks, whatever it is that people need at various points in their journey. I don't know whether you want to then break that into some kind of like shorts and reels, and you can put that onto YouTube Shorts and TikTok.
Yeah, I've been sharing it with clients of mine in my mastermind, F12 mastermind, and they found it really useful in terms of going, look, and listen, it's just, there's so many great books out there. These are just the ones that I've found really good. So there's a brilliant book called Play Bigger, which is all about how to be a category king, right? And it's an amazing book. But if you read it before you're about probably £1 million, or I think £500,000 to £1 million, before £1 million, kind of, if you read it there before that, it just doesn't resonate. It just, people go, oh, it's a good book, but I don't get how I would apply it. Whereas when you've got enough traction and you've got a team and you're starting to really make big moves in a market, you can go, hang on a second, I can see how I can be category king of this. I can own this category. That book's a killer, right? It's a brilliant book. Likewise, when you get to sort of 5 million, you want to go 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 if you want to do that journey. And bear in mind, not everybody does, and not everybody is built for it either. But then it starts to become about acquisition, right? It starts to become big. You got to look at things like acquisition plays and how to buy other businesses, because it's quicker to start to scale through acquisition at that point. Well, that requires a very different set of knowledge around finance, very different set of knowledge around strategy and all of those elements, right? In terms of if you're going to start acquiring businesses to scale quicker, it's a different play altogether. So again, it's just, if you realize that your job as an entrepreneur is, as I said at the very beginning, is a systematic acquisition of skills, right? But it's understanding which skills pay the bills at which level.
Yeah, that's true.
becomes, in my opinion, like one of the most important things I can do as a coach is to say to somebody, hey, listen, don't worry about all this stuff over here. Just worry about these three things. Just worry about these three things, right? All you got to worry about at the moment is cash, because growth sucks cash. All you got to worry about is hanging on and managing cash, because that's going to be critical. Systems and process, absolutely. Processes, absolutely. And fundamentally culture at this point. And cash then is usually around some kind of continuity product.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to solve that, is to go, right, how do we create a product that people pay for every month, regardless? Like, I've got a client of mine who has a chain of vets. I think 45% of their entire annual revenue, which is multiple seven figures, comes in on standing order in the first 7 days of every month. Because we've built a membership program over the last few years that they've done a great job of selling, and all of their clients that they look after, about 45% of the entire business is funded by membership. And when you do that, the multiple you create on exit value is massive. But also just how much less stress there is as an entrepreneur, knowing that you got that much money coming in on the first of every month. Yeah. That's what takes the stress away.
Yeah. Because there's obviously, so you've got the sales and then the operations. So once you've sold, you then got to deliver and operate. You've got to ensure good customer service, no negative feedback, all the rest of it. And that's, I think, what a lot of people struggle with. So some people actually think, not necessarily, but some people think the sales is probably the easiest part for them and they struggle with the operations. Some people are vice versa. But I'd say if someone finds the sales easy, but the operations the harder part, what is some tangible ways that, I don't know, they can, for example, track customer service and understand how to try and coach and build their team to ensure that they deliver as good of a customer service as they would themselves. Because that's a large part of a problem that entrepreneurs have, is they don't want to let go because they feel like other people can't do it as good as them.
Yeah.
So
I mean, some of that is mindset, which is thinking that I can do it better than everybody else. And if you have that mindset, it will keep you trapped, completely keep you trapped. And you don't realize then what your contribution to the business is. And then, for me, it's about sitting down and going, okay, great. If you want great customer service and you want great systems and process, who's your head of operations, or who's your operations manager? And you want to bring somebody in with a high level of sustaining energy, because that energy is absolutely brilliant at doing that. And realize that our job as entrepreneurs is to put the right people in the right seats. That's one of our jobs, right? Is to get out of boxes that we are not designed and not very good at. If you put me in a box with to do lots of finance and spreadsheet stuff, I'm going to be horrible. All right. I'm not going to be a very nice person doing it, because I hate doing it and I'm not good at it either. Whereas I've got an amazing commercial director who's incredible, loves that stuff. And I can have 1 hour every 2 weeks with her, and she runs all through the numbers and we look at everything and it's great. And she tells me if there are issues, and like, me paying her is a better investment of my money than me trying to do it myself. And here's the reason why most entrepreneurs, if you want my honest opinion, get stuck with this, is because we start underfunded. Okay, so in my career, I've had very different experiences. I had a business that I started with £10,000 on a credit card. I got into debt to start a business, which I wouldn't recommend to everybody, but I did it. That business got sold 3 years later, so it worked out all right. But that was one. And then I've had another where I was part of a team of 3 guys, and we raised money, and we scaled a business out to 450 employees in 3 years and sold it. And I've done it with money from investors, and that's a lot easier because you don't have the constraints. You can move faster and you can make decisions quicker. The challenge is, if you start and you're underfunded, then all you have is an abundance of time, right? All you have is loads of your own time. So you get stuck. I've seen this, is entrepreneurs tend to get stuck in this mindset of, I'll just do it myself because it's cheaper and I've got all the time in the world. Well, that's great when you're a startup doing 100 grand a year. When you're 500,000 and growing to 700,000 this year, you don't have time now. Time becomes your biggest enemy. And now it's about buying back your time. And the game now is about to hire people who give you a 2 or 3 times return of time for the money you're investing. So the skill now is to start to get out of boxes, and the skill is about how to recruit and retain talent. That becomes one of the major skills. Now, I did this at an event recently, and it was kind of interesting. I said, okay, so how many of you in the room would agree that recruiting and retaining talent is a critical success factor in scaling, right? Show of hands. So if you're listening to this podcast, I just think, how many of you would agree that's going to become a critical success skill? And most people put their hands up, right? Yes, we know, we can't, I have this phrase now that I'm using all the time, which is, you can't live the dream if you can't build a team, right? If you can't build a team, you can't live the dream. You're going to need to have other people around you, right? So I said, how many of you believe that's a critical success factor? And people put their hands up. And then I said, okay, great. Keep your hand up if you've read a book on team building in the last 6 months, right? Most people put their hand down, a few people left up. I said, right, keep your hand up if you read a book on interviewing skills in the last year. Most people put their hand down. So, okay, our ability to attract and interview talent is going to be one of the critical success skills. And most of us don't know how to interview properly. We don't even know how to write a job role in a way that's going to attract the right talent. And yet somehow we're just magically going to figure this out, right? And the quicker that you realize that actually that's the skill I'm going to need to learn. Okay, great. What are the 3 books I should read? Great. Okay. What are the tools? Like, we created a list of 100 best interview questions to ask. We paid a recruitment consultant to come in and work with us to build that out for clients. Because most people don't know how to interview. I mean, one of the best tips, one of my clients who's built a 7-figure recruitment business in 12 months. So this shows you how fast you can do it when you understand the roadmap, right? When you understand the road, you can go much faster if you understand what road you're on. She came to me, she was £354,000 turnover business and had a vision to be multiple 7 figures. In just 1 year, we went from that to 1.2 million in 12 months, right? We jumped to 12 months. And how do we do it? Same things I've shared with you on this. It was about the consistent application of the principles that I've just outlined, right? But the key thing is you've got to believe that's possible. For most people, they go, oh, I can't grow that fast. You can if you understand how to attract and retain talent. As a recruitment company, she understood how to attract and retain talent, right? So that was never going to be a block for us on scaling. We could always hire talent. But she said something to me that I'll share with you, which was absolutely brilliant. She said most people can figure out what questions to ask in an interview, but they don't understand what a good answer looks like.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Think about that for a second. You're going to interview somebody for a really important role. Let's just say it's head of operations, right? Or head of customer service. You're about to interview this person for head of customer service. What questions should you be asking? Because they're different if it's head of sales versus head of customer service. Very different questions. 2, what do good answers actually look like? And you think, yeah, how do you know if it's a good answer? Well, you don't if you haven't written down what the good answer is. So her tip was brilliant, and she shared it with the F12 Mastermind a couple of weeks ago. She said, if you're going to do an interview, write out what a good answer looks like before you ask the question, because that just means that you can compare what they said to what you think is a good answer. But I'd never heard it said like that, and I just thought that's gold dust. This is the power of a mastermind, right? I wouldn't have known that. But somebody with 20 years experience, or however many years experience her team has, of doing literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews, she was like, well, we've got, this is how we would never interview somebody for a position without understanding what good answers to the questions we're about to ask looks like. I was like, genius. That's the power of masterminds. I learned, I went away going, I am richer for that experience. I am richer for that conversation. I am more able to serve clients and add more value to them because of that conversation. That's the power of being in a room with people from other industries, is the speed you learn and accumulate knowledge is exponential, without question.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. And I really like that as well, because I think you need to actually identify what good or bad looks like across the board. This applies to everything really. Is we kind of just go through life, business, whatever, expecting something, but it's like, well, is that a good or bad thing? We don't know. And we try to become judgmental, but I think sometimes that kind of muddies the water. So it's really important we define everything very, very clearly so we can understand that from the offset. So I like that.
Yeah, most people hire for skills on a CV, right? They hire for skills. They look at a CV and they go, oh yeah, this person's got the Excel spreadsheet skills, or they've got the customer service skills that I need. And then they fire on behavior. They fire because the behavior of that person isn't in line with their values. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, they've never articulated the values. The values aren't written down. During the induction process, they've never taken them through the values and said, this, like, give you a good example, right? So if as a customer service person, one of the values is we respond quickly, right? That's a value. Well, what does that mean? And what does that look like? So does it mean we respond quickly even if we don't know the answer? Does it mean we give people any answer just to respond quickly even if it's the wrong one? No. So you start to work out what does a good version of respond quickly look like? And then what do we not do? We don't give an answer if we don't know the answer. We don't make it up. We don't, you come up with very clear what we do and don't do as a value. And then you're able to manage that person to that value because it's documented and written down. But most people don't do that. Most people just go, oh yeah, you've got all the skills I need. And we hire them. And then 3 months later we say, oh, I've got to let you go because you're not a good culture fit. Yeah, but hang on a second, wait, did you explain what the values were and how that behavior shows up, and how are you measuring that? And is that really fair on the person you've just offered the job to if you haven't done that as a leader? So I think, you were sort of saying about abdicate versus delegate. I think people do abdicate because they don't necessarily have a process for how they want that job to be run. You should never have to, it's not about delegate, it's about empowerment. Yeah. I always think delegate has a really bad, I'm going to delegate this to you. It's like, no, I'm going to empower you to be really good at this. And I'm going to do that by having a system that talks about how to do that, right? So like, we take a client, we take all of our clients now through a training where we show them how to save 15 hours a week by using technology and systemizing. And trust me, when you realize you can get your life back really quickly by putting the right systems in place, you'll get super excited about putting systems in place. When you say, like, hang on a second, so if I do all of this, my team get better, the retention rate goes up, people are happier, and I get time back, I get my life back. Yes. Okay, great. I'm sold. Right. Show me how to do that. It's like, but most of it's got systems really important. Doesn't have to be, not at all. Right. But it's like, the minute you realize that the freedom that you crave as an entrepreneur comes from building the right systems and processes for the right people to follow, Game changer.
Yeah.
You suddenly realize that there isn't a limit to what you can create other than your ambition.
And I think so. This is something that one of my friends the other day, we were just sat down, we were discussing it. He leads, I think, a team of 30 people. They deal with e-commerce and PPC and marketing and all sorts of stuff. And this was an interesting thing that he said. You've probably heard it before, but there's kind of 5 levels to delegating. So you kind of start from level 1 on a basic level is just do what I'm telling you to do, and that's just very much a spoon feeding. Just here's a task, just do it, which most entrepreneurs end up getting fed up with because they're like, why is this person constantly coming back to me? You've then got level 2, 3, 4, 5, but then 5 is I trust you implicitly. I trust that you've got the intuition, plus you know what the actual task is and what it entails to get it done. Go out and do it. And I think the level below that is level 4. It's like, get it all done, use your intuition, research it, come back and confirm it with me first before you kind of go out. So it's kind of moving in from level 1 to level 5. And I thought, in all honesty, you shouldn't need anything from level 1 to 3. You should only have level 4s or 5s, if not just 5s. It might start 4s, but you want level 5s. But you don't want people in your business where you're spoon feeding them. And that's where the word VA I don't really like. So virtual assistant, because you don't want a virtual assistant, you want a virtual team member, right? So a team member has
I agree with that. Yeah. Well, we have this thing as a cultural piece in all of my coaching programs where anybody says the word staff, we go team.
Yeah.
And they're allowed to say it a few times, and after that we start, they start to make donations to charity or whatever. Because just the mindset of saying, oh, I've got staff is a them and us. It's a me, I'm up here, you're down there mentality, right? You never find that. You'd never find that in a football club. Yeah. You'd never have people going, well, we've got the staff and the management. It's like, no, we're a team, right? This is a football team. And it's the same thing in business. It's like, we're a team. Doesn't matter what level you're at. You might be a different level, right? Absolutely. Everyone's got different roles and different levels in the business, but we are a team. I'm a team, right? If something needs doing and there's no one around to do it, I'm going to jump in and do it because I'm part of the team, right? And I think the danger is you have to be very careful with the words that you use. And, we have a whole framework for teams. And for me, it's the single biggest thing that comes up all the time when people say, what stops you scaling your business to the next level? It's not usually demand. If you found the right market and there's plenty of demand in the market, and it's usually the people piece, right? It's the people puzzles. It's how do I attract talent? How do I develop talent? How do I lead talent? How do I, how do I sort that piece out, right? It's normally the people puzzle that is the thing that gets in the way for most people trying to scale. And it's the thing that's the most expensive, right? So if you look at most businesses and you look at their P&Ls, salaries become the single biggest item for most businesses, right? Not all, but for a lot. And that cost, we want to get a really good return on that investment in talent, right? That return on that talent, we want to get that good investment. But that requires investing in some training or some development and to improve people and to improve our ability to lead them, right? Because otherwise, what we think we're just magically going to get good at that. That's quite an expensive gamble, I would suggest. Is to go, I'm just going to figure this out as I go. Really, trial and error, because that's about the most expensive way to learn it, right? There are, again, it's like climbing a mountain. There are proven paths to take. If you want to go from 1 million to 3 million, there are specific things you're going to need, right? I can tell you, I'll share this with you because this has been one of the biggest kind of massive shifts in my thinking in the last 12 months and realization is the most important person you need between, say, 1 million and 3 million when you're hiring as a leader. The most important person you're going to need on your business is going to be a part-time or fractional CFO. Okay, you are going to need somebody to be in the finance director box. Now, probably can't afford them to be full-time, but you're going to need a part-time FD and a good one because at that level, you get it wrong, you run out of cash really fast, right? Really fast. And you need somebody who is used to being higher up the mountain than you are. So they've been a CFO for a business that's 5 or 6 times bigger than yours, if not 10 times bigger than yours. So you're buying them for 2 to 3 days a month. And they're looking at your numbers and going, yeah, this one's off, this one's not right, this one needs to be here. And then they'll be able to add value to you by either talking to lenders who can help you raise money when you need it, or they're able to come in and go, right, actually, this metric's off. We need to do this. You need to pay attention to that. Oh, by the way, we want to bring in this piece of tech at this point to help us be more efficient. So the number of clients in the last 12 months that we've put part-time FDs into in partnership with an organization in the UK that sources them, and they've come in and it's changed the game completely for the entrepreneurs, completely changed everything. We've changed the profit margins as a result. We've changed investment decisions as a result. Like at that level, cash is so critical that if you don't have somebody who's used to that level of operation and above, it's too risky to have somebody who's a bookkeeper try and level up. It's not an FD, and you're going to need to play at that level, right? It's a mindset thing.
Yeah.
So it's that whole mindset thing of like, I'm building a grown-up business, and part of having a grown-up business is having a grown-up finance function, and part of having a grown-up finance function is having somebody who has the skills and knowledge at the FD level, right? Even if I don't think I'm ready for it, you trust me, you will be ready for it, and you will wonder how you will go, that's the best investment I've made in the last 6 months.
Yeah, that's a really, really good tip. And that's something that we've recently kind of looked at, is that financial controller role versus the financial director, and just seeing how we can kind of go from okay, you're looking at what's in the bank, to let's start doing cash flow forecasts for 6-12 months ahead, and let's start actually analyzing things properly. So yeah, that's all really, really good. And Paul, as we kind of, I mean, there's been some amazing answers to that question that I initially asked at the start. So we're kind of coming to the tail end of the podcast. But is there anything you want to add to that in terms of just like one tangible thing that people can take away today? And it could be anything. It could be anything at all. We've had some really interesting answers to this question, but one tangible way that people can take something away today and create an income from that outcome.
So I'll give you a slightly different take on this. I think, firstly, I think the danger is if you think income is everything, you're missing the game of being a human being, right? Which is it's not just income, it's about impact. You want to have an impact on your team that's positive. You want to have an impact on your customers that's positive. Because if you have positive impacts on people's lives, you tend to generate income, okay? But I think the biggest thing that catches entrepreneurs out is this idea that I have a good idea and I don't do something with it. So I often talk about the fact that ideas are perishable. So ideas, the minute you have an idea, that's why Richard Branson's famous for walking around with a notepad all the time, because he's always taking notes. But the minute you have an idea, if you don't act on that idea within 72 hours, the chances of you ever acting on it are practically zero, right? You just forget about it or you move on. And years later, you see somebody else who's made millions out of the same idea that you had. Because the way the universe works is that it gives the same idea to multiple people at the same time, because it's trying to find the person who will execute on it, who will take action on it. So I think one of my big things I say to clients all the time, and I'll say to everyone listening to this podcast, is look, if you want to create more outcomes and create more income, learn to execute faster, learn to test and measure quicker. So if you have a really good idea, ask yourself the question, right, how could I test this in 72 hours? How could I talk to 5 people about the idea and get their feedback? Could I run a survey to my customer list and say, hey, I had this idea for this product. Would you be interested in buying it if I launched it? Could I, I'm thinking of buying a specific building, for example, or I've got plans to develop something. Right, let's go and talk to 5 bankers in the next, or book meetings in the diary with 5 potential funders in the next 72 hours. Go and talk to them about it and see what they think. Like, get really clear on what you can do in 72-hour windows, because A, it's much more than you think, and B, it creates a level of urgency and energy that attracts income. People are attracted to people who are going somewhere, right? Who are on a mission and who are moving forward. The energy attracts, money is attracted to that kind of energy. So get really good at going, all right, I've had an idea, I've got 72 hours to do something with it, otherwise I have to put it in the bin. And move on, right? Because if I haven't done something with it in 72 hours, it wasn't exciting enough, or I didn't feel passionate about it to want to put any more effort behind it. So for me, if your goal is to, tick things off or create outcomes that generate future income, then get very good at going, okay, great, I've got to learn to test, measure, refine, right? And then go again. But like 72 hours, there's a clock ticking. So if you've listened to this podcast, you've got really good value from it. You've got half a dozen ideas. The clock starts now. You've got 72 hours. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with those ideas, right? Because your job is to see how can you generate income from those ideas in the next 72 hours. Start playing that game. And it's amazing how many times you'll go, oh, hang on a minute. Great. That idea, I've made money from it in 72 hours. That gets you really excited about it. That gets you to want to scale it and play it at a bigger game. So test your ideas fast, figure out how you can monetize them faster. And in my experience, that's how your outcomes will generate more income.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is such a good answer to that question. I think it's procrastination to execution with a hard deadline, basically, just to kind of summarize what you're basically saying there, which I think a lot of people overlook hard deadlines, but I think hard deadlines are so important from keeping things ongoing. But yeah, what an amazing answer.
Well, there's a whole story. Do you know the story about where the term deadline even comes
No,
from?
go on. Actually, let's finish off on that
Okay.
note.
So, yeah, I'll come back and we'll have a discussion about
There will be a
procrastination
part
because there's
two.
two.
Yeah, there will be a part two.
Yeah, there's two types of procrastination as well, by the way, and entrepreneurs need to understand the difference between both of them because one's positive and one's negative. Anyway, very quick thing. Story of deadlines, where deadlines came from. So deadline refers to during the 1800s when they were building railway tracks across America. This is the story I've read anyway. When they were building railway tracks across America, obviously they used convicts to build the railway tracks. Okay. And obviously, if you're building across America, there's a campsite at night. You can't build a prison to keep people, so you got to keep people in some kind of campsite at night. And what they used to do is they used to draw a line around the camp, and it was called a deadline. And if you went beyond that deadline, i.e., tried to escape, you got shot.
Wow.
That was it. So it was like, listen, this isn't a discussion here. If you go beyond this line, game over, right? So like it was a fairly final line. So like it got known as the deadline. You have to have a deadline, right? Like after that, you're dead. If you go beyond that line, you're dead. And that's where that term comes from. So certainly where I read the history of it, because I was trying to find out where does this term come from. But I think it's about having a compelling event. It's about having a compelling event. And if you think about it, Mel Robbins talks about this in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You know, if you've got 72 hours and you've got a clock on your phone that's counting down from 72 hours, you'll be amazed how much more energized you get as that clock starts to go down and you're running out of time. The biggest single challenge for entrepreneurs is that we think we have more time than we do. We think we have more time than we do. We think we have an unlimited amount of time to do it and build a business and I can wait 2 or 3 days, right? That mindset creates procrastination for sure. But when you realize that you're living on a countdown clock every single day and one day the countdown clock's out and you're done and that's it, game over, like you'll act with a lot more urgency in your life. And I would say urgency is the single biggest driver of outcome to income. Urgency.
Amazing.
Become more urgent.
Yeah, that is really, I think that's the take-home message. Urgency is the single biggest impact driver in reality. So love that. Yeah, perhaps we may rename it. The outcome is impact. Let's see.
It's both, isn't it? You want to make money. You need to make money because a fundamental business has a responsibility as a director and a shareholder to make a profit, right? That's our first responsibility as shareholders, to make a profit. So it is about income, but I think it's about income and impact. I think it's both. And the best businesses in the world right now that everyone is really looking at are businesses that are making money and an impact, not just making money. So I think as an entrepreneur, the great question is, how can I make a positive impact in the world and make money at the same time? It's not an either or, but how can I do both is a really strong question to kind of ask yourself. And for me, in answer to your question about the outcome is income, there's a reason why I finish just about every seminar I've ever run with the phrase, you get paid on what you get done. Because that's the only thing that drives income in my experience, is ticking stuff off, getting things done, right? You don't get paid on things you don't finish.
It's true. Execution is everything. So Paul, look, this has been amazing, and I've taken a lot of notes away from this mentally, which I'm going to go back and speak to the team about, but I'm sure a lot of the listeners have as well. But, and this is totally unrehearsed, by the way. So could you create
okay.
You talked about an irresistible offer. Could you create an irresistible offer for anyone listening to this thinking, do you know what? A lot of what you said, Paul, has resonated with me. I want to take action, and maybe off the back of this, then start to take action and maybe try and obviously start implementing or executing better. So yeah, any irresistible offer you can create for our listeners?
Yes, actually. How about this? So I'm a great believer in measure where you're at. First things first. So we created a scorecard which measures where you are at on having a grown-up business across all the levels that we talked about. So you can either go to my LinkedIn profile, which is probably the best thing. So if you go to Paul Avins, go to LinkedIn, search Paul Avins. There's a link at the top of my LinkedIn profile to take the scorecard. Or you can go to, I think it's Grown Up Business School, grownupbusiness.com. If you go to that, it takes you straight through as well, grownupbusiness.com. So if you take the scorecard and then connect with me on LinkedIn and just shoot me a quick message, you're taking the scorecard, I'll see that anyway and connect with me on LinkedIn. I will then put you into our Grown Up Business Academy. We have an academy and I'll give you access to £10,000 worth of free training for 3 months. Okay, so I'll give you 3 months to test my training, to take my training for free, to try it all out. And you can take complete no charge, right? Completely. So your goal should be to move the needle in 3 months. So you'll get access to my community. Loads of my clients are in there. You can network with some amazing entrepreneurs, 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs that are in there. All I ask is that you play the game, right? So take it seriously, watch the videos and apply what you learn, and then come back and tell me how much of a difference it made in 3 months. So there's lots and lots of training in there about how to build teams, how to put processes in, how to save 15 hours a week is in there as well. That's in there. So we'll give you all of that kind of training completely free of charge. All you got to do is connect with me on LinkedIn and take the scorecard. Do those 2 things, and I'll give you access for 90 days to £10,000 of training.
Amazing. That is amazing. And yeah, for the action takers, 72 hours to take action. So
72 hours, yes.
So we will drop the links as well.
You'll put a link in the show notes to all that stuff, right?
I will send you a link. I will link to your LinkedIn as well and your website as well. So we'll do that. Thank you so much. We've really, really enjoyed having you on, and I'm really excited to release this one for all of our audience. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. And remember, you get paid on what you get done.
Excellent stuff.
Wow. Now, I was absolutely gutted that I couldn't make it for this episode, as I always get so much value from speaking to Paul and learning from his experience. If you got any value from this conversation, please do make sure to check out the link in the show notes for access to Paul's scorecard. Once you filled it out, send him a message on Instagram so that his team can sort you out with access to his irresistible offer. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a review and let us know your thoughts. Share the podcast with someone that you think may enjoy the show, and we'll catch you in the next one.